Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm your host, Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with a geriatric Charles Coulombe.
Geriatric. You mean elderly.
That's right. Aren't you, though?
Senescent.
Yeah.
1 foot in the grave.
Well.
Past his best-by date.
Oh, yeah. No, I kid.
White-haired.
I kid.
White-haired. Elderly.
Elderly.
Senior citizen. Senior discount. Golden years.
Wow. You're pretty close to that senior discount.
Actually, there's a Chinese buffet in Hollywood that always gives it to me without my saying anything.
Oh, okay. So?
But, well, I may be old, but it doesn't mean I don't know nothing. And I'll tell you what. It has been a wild time here in the old empire, but not as wild as in the United States.
Okay.
Golly Moses, from sea to sun to shining sea, they're going wild in the States. Wild in the jungle, rumble in the jumble is what they is.
Honestly, we were talking about this before. I'm too exhausted to care anymore.
Well, you know, that's awfully nice coming from you, considering the incident 2 days ago outside the Tumblr House Tower.
Okay, Charles, go ahead
really
and tell your tale.
You really want me to reveal what happened? I don't mind doing it.
Go ahead, Charles. You're going to do it anyway, and far be it from me to stop you.
Well, all right, since you mention it. As you folks may or may not be aware, at the gate to the entrance to the Tumblr Tower compound, there is a big statue. And it is a statue, and I must say a pretty lovely statue, as statues go, of the founder of California and Los Angeles, Carlos III. Now, unfortunately, the artist didn't really know what he looked like, and it's kind of, what's the word I want? A little abstract, I guess you would say. It's not really easy to tell if it's the king or the virgin or a unicorn, but whatever you think it is, it's a large statue. Well, it so happened that 2 days ago, a mob approached the statue, armed with spray paint and all that. Now, as a funny peculiarity, there is a PA system that would have allowed your chief of security, Tyrone, to have told the mob to disperse. He very purposefully waited until they were just at the statue, and just because it's outside the gate. They were just about to go after it, when suddenly Tyrone turned on the sound system so they could hear the bolts being pulled on the rifles. And then Tyrone said, "One daub, whoever does it, he's a dead man," and fired a shot in the air.
Oh, that's sending a message.
Well, that's what I thought. It sent a message, but I thought it was interference with free speech. Now, the mob didn't stick around. One shot in the air, and then he said, "The next man that gets near that statue is a dead man." And then the mob dispersed. But my question is, well, threefold. Number one, did you tell Tyrone not to warn them, but just to give the impression they were about to be shot dead?
Look, I give Tyrone autonomy to use the method that he feels would be most effective.
Yeah, but does "make me shoot you, sucker" really? I mean, is this the way? What kind of community outreach is that? "Make me shoot you, sucker."
Look, if you want me to mention it in the quarterly review for employees, okay, I'll mention it.
No, I'm not complaining. I'm just asking if you think that is an effective way to practice community outreach.
Community outreach?
Yeah.
Aren't we trying to achieve the exact opposite of community outreach?
Well, I don't know. These were members of the community. It's just they weren't members of the local community. They'd all been bussed in.
What's the opposite of community outreach?
I don't know, community intake?
I mean, we're trying to isolate ourselves from the community right now. I mean, we're on
Well,
lockdown, Charles.
you did a pretty good job, I must say. When I heard the recording, the sound of all those rifles, being cocked, it was amazing. There were bolt actions. The bolts pulled back. I didn't even know you had them using bolt actions. I think it was done just for the sound.
You know, I don't know. It's been a crazy time. I was talking to my sister about this because it's just a scary time in general. She told me a story about the '92 riots, which I feel she wouldn't mind me telling everybody. She was going to Cal State Long Beach at the time, so she had an apartment in Long Beach, and things got pretty dodgy. I think it was Rodney King at the time. Things were getting pretty dodgy, and she had to get out of Dodge. And so she called her boyfriend at the time, who was in Torrance. He said, I'm in a pretty safe neighborhood, so come on over. Oh, but when you get down my street, be sure to roll down your window so that they can see that you're white. And she said, Who's they? He said, don't worry about it, okay? Just do it, okay? So she drives down, and she gets to the street. And finally, she understood who they were. On the top of every single house on that block was an ex-military resident armed to the teeth on the top of each roof. They had congregated there. I'm very scared that, it seems these stupid people, I don't know, I'm just scared of the cycle of things,
Well, that, all kidding aside, that is my, almost as much as the morons themselves, I fear what they're going to arouse. And if the authorities do not act, then people will act for them. But they won't be acting according to any kind of procedure or protocol.
Exactly.
They will be acting unpredictably. And, the thing, I've said this before, I'll say it again and again and again, what this has shown, amongst many other things, is the intense lack of leadership in so many places at the state and local levels. And I know you've heard me go on till I'm blue in the face at other times, but I'll say it again now. The next set of municipal elections, ladies and gentlemen, the next set of county elections, the next set of state elections, do your homework and vote. And make sure that none of these people that are mismanaging the situation at the moment get in again. They need to go on unemployment. It's very simple. The other thing you've got to do is you've got to maintain your own sanity. You can't give in to anger. But at the same time, and this, we discussed this, I was just on another show, and we discussed this, sense of fidelium. If your parish church is in danger, if you're in an area where that's a problem, you do need to talk to the local authorities about making sure that it's protected, because they have to know that if they don't do the job, somebody will. It's better if they do it. Because if it's left up to you and your fellow parishioners, bad things might happen for which they'll be responsible. In all of this, I can't help but thinking of Archbishop, although at the time Bishop John Hughes of New York, Dagger John, as he was called. partly because of the way he wrote his name. Instead of the cross, it looked like a dagger. But also because of his winning, personality.
That is the most epic nickname any prelate has ever gotten in the history of the world.
That's true. Dagger John.
Dagger John. Wow.
And Dagger John didn't take a lot of crap from people. He just didn't, So the Know Nothing riots were occurring in Charleston, in Philadelphia, and Boston. And Catholic homes were being destroyed. Catholic convents and churches were being burned. Catholics were being hung from lampposts. And this was happening, as I say, in a number of major cities. Well, the mayor of New York at the time was a Know Nothing himself. So Dagger John goes in to see him. And he says, I really hope, Mr. Mayor, that we don't have the same problems in New York they've been having in those other cities. And the mayor smirked and said, oh, afraid for your churches, are you? And he says, oh, no, Mr. Mayor, not at all. I'm afraid for your city. Because if a single Catholic property is torched or a single Catholic life is lost, we will burn this place to the ground and make it another Moscow. And you know what happened? Nothing. Because the mayor was a smart man, not a dum-dum. And because Dagger John meant what he said, he didn't make threats he wouldn't have kept. So, as I say, if your parish is in a place where you're fearful it might be threatened, mobilize your fellow parishioners, speak to your pastor, and speak to local law enforcement. And bearing in mind, of course, that local law enforcement in a lot of places are having their hands tied by the local mayor and so on. So it may be, if that's the case where you are, that you have to have a little chat with His Honor and make sure that His Honor knows that if he lets your church go up in flames, his life will be not worth living. It'll be very unpleasant. These people have to have what they do brought home to them. Because understand, the rioters and all that, a lot of these people are stupid kids who are the product of really worthless college educations. A few months ago, they were hiding in safe spaces, and now they're out breaking statues. The problem of the authorities who let it go on and on and on.
Well, it's like that tweet that I sent you.
Yeah.
From that I don't know, celebrity sports person, where the first picture, his initial tweet, is a picture of a building in flames. It said, "Burn that crap down." And then a couple of days later, he put a tweet, "Oh, these people are animals. They're going after, they're destroying the Starbucks and all these, in his neighborhood." Now he's affected.
Oh, poor little fellow. So terrible. See, when in the 92 riots, I was writing for a very good magazine, a black magazine in Louisiana. I was their only white columnist. And I wrote about the riots in LA. And I asked my readers a question, and I think it's a fair one. How oppressed do I have to be before you think it's okay for me to burn down your house or your business? And the answer will always be never. They could be torturing me, and you will never think it's all right for your house to go up in flames because of it. And I understand that.
Yeah. I mean, for me to stay, for my sanity, I keep having to say, Jesus, I trust in you, do a lot of spiritual reading, think of the things that really matter in this world, and think about how this time has gotten me to pray more in my development. It got me thinking a lot of thoughts. I think a lot of people of goodwill have experienced similar things. One of the things I'll impromptu ask you, we haven't talked about this pre-show or prepared for this at all, but I was likening our time to some extent and comparing it to Jesus' time in terms of what do we want, in terms of we want sort of political liberation, in a sense, to be free of all this stuff. And I was wondering, should we be is a holy detachment required on some level, instead of the wailing and gnashing of teeth, as it says in the Bible. Because, and I guess Cardinal Sarah's latest book influenced me, where he says you're a Judas if you have all this faith in a social movement or a political movement or an organization or social activism, rather than prayer, rather than have faith in God. When you have faith in human things, for a liberation of this world, to what extent is that like asking for us? Is that like us asking to release Barabbas instead of Jesus? Because Jesus did not provide, political freedom for the Jews. They're still looking for this Messiah. And so to what extent are we sort of making the same mistake as the Jews?
Well, it depends entirely upon what it is we're after. I mean, number one, Catholic political action, Catholic political action, always, if it's going to be effective, always has to put prayer first. It always did.
Yeah.
It's also done with the knowledge that it may be defeated. Yeah. In which case, you've got to be prepared to be a martyr.
The Vendée.
The Vendée, the Tyrol, so many different places, and not just military struggles like that, but also political ones. The Cristeros and so forth come to mind. But having said all that, notice that they were not really movements for liberation per se, but simply for the truth to be able to function, since the truth was being suppressed. In other words, they were defense. They were not quite the same thing as liberation in that sense. The other thing, too, that has to be borne in mind is that there are 3 acceptable things you can do when you're faced with persecution. You can be martyred, which is the most perfect. Yeah. You can resist it, which is perhaps next. And you could flee, which is not the most admirable, but it's certainly not sinful either.
St. Paul talked about that, where, it's fine. I mean, depending on your circumstances.
Depending on your circumstances. Where we do become Judases, I think, is if we look to a purely political solution to fix things.
Yeah.
Because that, again, and you've often heard me say this, everything that we as Catholics hold dear in the political order actually came to us as the byproducts of the long-term evangelization of Europe. Then they were, as I say, byproducts. They were not what people started out to do. They happened, thankfully, but they were not the initial end in mind. St. Benedict, for instance, when he started Western monasticism, didn't do so with the view to saving Western civilization. Now, he did, but that was not the end that he had in mind. The end was the salvation of the souls of the monks. But that ora et labora, work and prayer,
yeah,
of what does that work consist? Well, for the Benedictines, it ended up consisting of agricultural work and making manuscripts and so forth. Yeah. For the knightly orders and the Crusades, it was caring for the sick and the pilgrims on the one hand, and defending them with the sword on the other. That was their aura. Their labora, rather. But the aura, the prayer, always came first.
I think so much is built into me through my reading, because now more is starting to flood into my brain. I'm remembering one of my favorite Solange Hertz quotes, which relates to mistakes of the papacy, where she says the church always gets into trouble when it tries to come up with political solutions to spiritual problems.
No. And
And
that's fair
America's
to say.
problem is not a political problem, it's a spiritual problem.
Yeah.
And so
It,
coming up with political solutions to spiritual problems doesn't really fix the thing.
the only thing they can do for you is get you some breathing space.
Yeah.
That they can do for you, but they're never an end in themselves because they can't be.
Yeah.
It's like, how are you going to prolong your life? Well, I'll brush my teeth every day. Well, okay, that's good, but that's not going to, that's by itself, it's not going to, it'll keep your teeth clean, which I'm sure is helpful. And I think too that one of our major problems is that we expect immediate solutions.
Yeah.
And they very often don't happen, immediate solutions. We tend to invest so much, well, like as we've seen with the Trumpster, and as other people saw with Obama before him, and they invested almost messianic hopes in the fellow,
Yeah.
and then he's elected. And then there's an inevitable disappointment because they were expecting more out of a political figure than a political figure can possibly provide.
Yeah.
And Solange was quite right when it came to the papacy. I mean, if you just look at the 17th century, initially, what happens? Urban VIII, fearful that the Holy Roman Emperor will become the master of the papacy, backs the Swedes against the Holy Roman Emperor, and thus helps the Protestant cause keep going long enough until the French get involved.
Mm.
But then, 50 years later, 40 years later, 50 years later, the shoe's on the other foot. Now the then Pope is afraid that the King of France is going to be the dominant power in Europe and reduce him to a chaplain. So what does he do? He backs the Protestant William of Orange. And when the French king's ally is defeated at the Battle of the Boyne, King James II, he has the Te Deum sung in Rome.
Mm.
Now, these are grotesque examples.
Yeah.
But it shows you that we're all of us capable of falling into the temptation. A version of this happened after World War II, and I think deeply affected the Vatican Council. The idea that a world historical event somehow changes reality. You know, in view of World War II, we can no longer say that Catholicism is the one true church. Well, okay. How do you do that? And it's an easy trap to fall into because they didn't present it to themselves quite that boldly. They didn't say humanitarianism is more important than teaching the faith. They didn't say that, but they did it.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, if you think about it, look at the church's response to the coronavirus. Your physical welfare is more important than getting the sacraments.
I know.
I mean, you know, in a sense, they were trusting to the governments in this thing rather than to God.
I know. There's been a lot of solutions suggested, a lot of, we need to convince people of this, that. To me, again, I feel like the problem is very simple because obviously we have people espousing weird ideas.
Also,
And what is this a function of? This is a function of everyone having truckloads of mortal sin on their souls. And that darkens your intellect. I've always said that there's a certain litmus test of goodwill, and it relates to abortion. Because how can you accede to How can you say pro-choice is fine? It, on in goodwill, you can't. You have to be of bad will, and I don't believe that people can be in favor of these things in a state of grace. You see, I
Yeah.
don't believe that. You have to be incredibly, incredibly stupid. So I think that's our problem: is that it just the sin in each person has built up so much that you can't help but be irrational. It reminds me of Father Ripperger too. I think this is why I feel this way, because I remember on one of Father Ripperger's talks, in interviewing a possessed person, a demon out of possessed person, he says, "Yeah, so he asks the demon, so you're miserable, right?" And the demon says, "Yeah, yeah, I'm miserable." And Father Ripperger says, "You're miserable because you're separated from God, right?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah, I am." He's like, but you continually will to be separated from God, even though it's continually making you miserable." It's like, yeah, it's just pure evil. Evil results in
Well,
irrationality. It's not some pure intellectual discourse.
no, it's not. And I mean, well, look at when we sin. I mean,
That's
when
irrational. Yeah,
but we talk ourselves into it.
yeah.
We tell ourselves, even though on a higher level we know it's not going to make us happy, but we tell ourselves, well, it doesn't just this once, or it doesn't apply to me now because, or whatever we come up with. That's why, I always suggest to people when they're waiting in line at the confessional, especially if you've got an old lady and you're going to be there for quite a while, don't just think of all of your sins. Think of how you convinced them yourself that they were okay.
That's that's a perfect example because that translates easy. We can see how we're doing that on a huge scale now, where
Yeah.
it just translates that way. We're making the same excuses.
Well, I mean, remember that corporate life, that is to say, of nations, of states, of companies, of corporations, of schools and colleges, any kind of corporate life, is a reflection of the individual lives of the people in it. Give me virtuous people, and I'll give you a virtuous corporation, or a virtuous company, or a virtuous school, a virtuous whatever. It's the mystery of iniquity, the mystery of evil. It's really annoying.
Yeah. So, anything else before we get to the memes?
Uh, yeah, just a couple things. St. John's Eve is coming up, June
Yeah.
the 23rd. So if you can light a bonfire and tell ghost stories, you go right ahead. But remember, there's a blessing for the bonfire in the Roman Rituale for the St. John's fire. And of course, the following day is Saint Jean Baptiste, which, as we all know, is the national holiday of the French Canadians. It's like St. Patrick's Day. And just like on St. Patrick's Day, everybody's Irish. On St. Jean Baptiste Day, everybody's French Canadian. And everybody eats poutine. And
Yum yum.
everybody, oh yes indeed, everybody drinks Bagos. That's our French Canadian moonshine. And everybody runs around in a toque with a bright red sash and pretends that they're French Canadian. It's really great.
Good.
You
Okay.
didn't know that?
I didn't know some of those things.
Well, there's a French Canadian bar just down the street from the Tumbler House Tower. You should go there on Saint Jean Baptiste.
La Parisienne?
No, La Parisienne
That
is long
closed.
gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's long gone. No, the French Canadian bar. There are French Canadian bars in every neighborhood.
What's the
It's like
bar?
Irish bars.
What's the
Huh?
bar?
It's the one by the tower.
I think you're telling a tale.
No, I'm not telling you a tale. I actually, all kidding aside, this is I might as well tell this for Saint Jean Baptiste. But the town of Nantes in France is a major port where a lot of our ancestors left the old world to come to Quebec. And as a result, it gets a lot of French Canadian tourist travel, for people coming back to see where our ancestors left from. Well, One thing you should know about the French-Canadian method of swearing, unlike the French method, is that it invokes holy things like iste, which is host, cadiz, which is chalice, and tabernacle, which is tabernacle. These are not nice things to say as swear words, but we do. So I'm walking along the street, in Nantes, and I see this bar with the name Ta-T-A hyphen B-A-R hyphen N-A-K. Tabarnak. And I looked at that and I thought, oh, this has got to be French Canadian. And it's got to be. And I went in the door laughing, just roaring my head off. And the bartender was smugly standing behind the bar, and he said, "Vous êtes français canadien? You're French Canadian." I said, "D'accord." But I asked him, "How do you know?" And he said, "Because only French Canadians come laughing through that door the way you just did." That's why we gave it this name, so you would do just that.
Wow.
Tabarnak.
What city?
In Nantes.
Okay.
In the west of France. But it has as I say, it's got a very historically close connection to, like Lorient does. A lot of our ancestors took the great journey from there. A grand voyage.
Okay. Time for the memes.
Nationalize the memes of production.
For the common good.
That's right.
All right.
They're all covered with slogans and red paint and stuff.
All right. We've actually just got a bunch of fun comments on our videos from some super fans.
Oh, boy.
Let's get the first one from Todd Bird. What's the Patreon amount to get a 2-hour George Norrie Charles episode, and how do I sign over my house and cars to Tumblr House to make it happen? And I responded, I'll have Tyrone send over the contract shortly. It will be an offer you can't refuse. And Todd Bird responded, can you maybe suggest that the contract not be tied to a brick thrown through my mother's window at 2 a.m. this time? I don't want to get involved in Tumblr House business practices. Just some customer feedback is all.
That's how I got my contract.
Okay, wait. Slow down, Charles. Slow down. Okay, look. I don't know anything about any mom or any brick through any window or any 2 a.m. thing, okay? I don't know anything about it. I don't know what you're talking about. But I do recommend you sign that contract because it really sounds like they mean business.
That's exactly what Steve said to me when he had me sign the contract. It came in my window just the same way.
Okay.
It's good to know that nothing's changed.
You don't want to mess around with these things, okay?
No. I wouldn't dream of it.
Yeah.
I just saying that it's a strange. I've never had any other company I've ever worked for throw the contract in tied around a brick at 2 a.m. It is effective. It gets the attention. I'll tell you that.
All right. Next one is from Finbar.
And I did sign it.
You did sign it. Good. Everybody signs it. Or so I'm told. I mean, I don't know any about such things, but yeah. Okay. Next question or next comment is from Finbar Tilderhaven.
There's a name.
The House of Franchini buries its secrets in California.
Very true.
Wow. Okay.
That's for sure.
Let's see here. We've got.
I'll never forget your uncle Giacomo telling me that L.A. was a better place to dump things than Atlantic City.
Okay. So we've got a couple comments here from. What is this? El Bayes. I want to know what's in the meditation garden to make Charles kill, cheat, and steal, or whatever it takes to get an hour live stream of the place.
That's not something I can share with the uninitiated. It's not something I'm really able to talk about. I can't really put it into words, to be honest with you.
Yeah, Todd Bird tries to put it into words. He says, it's something similar to the Lovecraftian Mouth of Madness or the Dead Lights from it.
Shh!
It's a hypnotic, otherworldly, indescribable phenomenon that comes from parts unknown. Vincent so far has been the only human entity capable of containing it in a single physical space and time. I'm not sure of the mechanism, but it is absolutely tied to the enormous wealth and power Tumbler House has attained in the past few years.
What is wrong with you? How can you even say that? They're not supposed to. I mean, what I meant was poppycock. That is sheer nonsense. Why does he say those things? Vincent, I don't believe he knows what he is talking about. I think the gentleman has taken leave of his senses. That's right, isn't it? Yes, taken leave of his senses. Why did you reveal? I mean, why did you? Why? What was the question again? I'm sorry.
Okay, and that'll do it for the memes of production. On to the questions.
All right.
All right, first question is from Patty, as in Padraig.
Not as in peppermint.
Yes, not as in peppermint. Bonjour, Vincent and Charles. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Before the questions, I have to do a gratuitous plug to the Patron pre-show. We've had another long one, over an hour long. So
I'll say.
Oh, it was a really in-depth one. Sign up for as low as $1 a month. Yeah.
And I revealed where I get my ideas.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Charles.
I came clean.
Yeah, near the end, we got a question on Charles. Where do you get your ideas from? And Charles tells us the real horrible truth.
Yeah, and if you want to know what it is, I'd cough up at least $1 and find out, because they say confession is good for the soul. That's not always true. I mean, I found that out when I went one day. The first time I ever went into the meditation garden, for example. I'm sorry, what was I talking about?
I don't know. You're speaking weird things.
No, I'm fine. It's just that, as I was saying, the meditation garden. Yeah, I'm sorry. What was I saying?
Are you okay, Charles?
Well, yes, of course I'm okay. I seem to remember. Were we talking about the meditation garden? I'm sorry. What was I saying?
Oh my gosh! All right, let's just move on to the next question. All right.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, if you have no other alternative, and I want you all to remember this, if in the face of adversity you have no other alternative, remember, you can always go crazy. There's always that alternative.
All right.
Well, think about it. I mean, they're threatening you. They put a bullet to your head, or rather, a pistol to your head. Do you renounce everything you believe in? Wow, I had no idea it was all purple.
Yeah, people.
Always the way out.
People do not go crazy. They change their perceptions so that in the midst of their confusion, they find a sanity of their own.
Wow, that's deep and stuff. Yeah. Can I be your friend?
Okay. All right.
So you were saying.
So I was saying. Bonjour, Vincent and Charles. We'll soon be 2 years since Archbishop Vigano's released his bombshell testimony detailing clerical abuse at the highest levels of the hierarchy. At present, many of those named are still in power. Rome has failed to produce the honest McCarrick report. Do you see the impact of this strange ecclesiastical saga being?
Well, in the long term, not much, any more than the 100 years of the pornocracy in the 900s plays a big role in our everyday lives today. In the immediate, quite a bit, because it means we have no effective leadership. I mean, there is a sense, of course, in which every Catholic at any time is on his own, in the sense that each of us will be judged as individuals. Whether you go to heaven or hell, whether I go to heaven or hell, is going to be dependent on you and me ultimately alone. But it's easier, one is happier, if there is some discernible effective leadership going on at the top. At the moment, there doesn't seem to be any. It's as though everything's in free fall. Them's the breaks. Different periods of church history have different problems, and this is ours right now, is what appears to be an intense and enormous failure of leadership. So how do we deal with it? Well, we deal with it by doubling up on our prayer life, the sacraments, devotions, and especially on focusing on the miraculous elements of the faith. Eucharistic miracles, miraculous relics, the apparitions of Our Lady and the saints. I mean, all that element of the faith, in other words, that the leadership really has not much to say about. The saints are still in heaven. God is still in heaven. The angels are still about. Your guardian angel is still looking after you. All those things remain the same. The Eucharist remains the Eucharist, Yeah. So, no one can stop you from being terribly devoted to the Sacred Heart and the Rosary and the Precious Blood and so on. No one can stop you from being devoted to the Kingship of Christ and the Queenship of Mary, to the Sacred and Immaculate Hearts. Nobody can stop you from doing that, from venerating the most pure heart of St. Joseph, from using sacramentals, wearing the scapular, and so on, St. Benedict medal. No one can stop you from that. No one can stop you from telling your friends and family about the faith. No one can stop you from living the faith. All that is up to you. Just as if we had really good leadership, really effective leadership, stood up, you would still be in a position not to do any of that stuff. And nobody could force you to do it.
I was going to put this at the end, but given Charles's answer, it sort of segues into this. I want to promote, as one of the books of the week, something that I've been reading recently, 4-volume set, The Life of Jesus Christ in Biblical Revelations by Anne Catherine Emmerich. Look how many, this is like over 2,000 pages of biblical revelation. This, I promoted this before, but I want to promote it again. Because it really fills in the gaps of the Bible, because the Bible handles things with brevity, appropriately, but some of these scenarios in the Bible are really enhanced with Anne Catherine Emmerich, and I feel more clarity is given. I'll give you a good example. I just read this last night, so I feel compelled to say it because it was so interesting. And I think everybody would benefit from it. So you remember when Jesus gets really angry at the temple. He says, you're turning my Father's house into a den of thieves. And he flips over the table. And it's easy to not understand Jesus there because it's so briefly handled. Was he being rash? Did he need to do that? What was the situation? You almost wonder, is it impulsive? Like, what else is going on? Well, Anne Catherine Emmerich deals with this in detail and in a way where it completely makes perfect sense, and so you can better understand it. And so I'll just recount this incident for everyone. So at the temple, I forgot what holy day it was, but it was several days. It was a big to do. And so there's all this commerce, out in front, but it is, as Anne Catherine Emmerich says, 2 feet away from the worshipers doing actual worshiping. It was intrusive. The money changers and the people selling the slaughtered lambs. There's all this noise, there's all this racket, and it's actually leaching and impacting negatively the actual worship service that was going on. It was right there. It was right next door. It wasn't like, 50 feet away. It was 2 feet away. And the first day, Jesus actually asked these people nicely, like, can you just leave? And they said, yeah, okay, we'll leave. Yeah, sure. So that was one day. Next day, they're back again. And Jesus, a little bit angrier this time. And they got a little fresh with Jesus, too. They gave him some lip. But, I forgot if they left on that time. Third day of the celebration, of, the activities in temple, Jesus comes again. They're resistant. That's when it happens, what's recorded in the Bible. Because these people would not move. And Jesus was nice. More importantly, what's more interesting about this is the Pharisees obviously don't like when Jesus takes charge, because that sort of undermines their authority, right?
I would say.
There's sort of a little disorder, a little disruption in the temple, and they don't like that as well. So they send the guards in to clean it up. But understand this situation. Firstly, I should also say that everybody was happy what Jesus did. Anne Catherine Emmerich says, all the devout people, everyone was cheering what he did, because everybody in that temple knew it was wrong, including the Pharisees. But everybody was silent. Jesus did what no one else would do. Isn't that a little bit like our time? And so you have this awkward situation here where the Pharisees are kind of frustrated at Jesus. But how could they arrest him? How could they have the guards do that when they're humiliated that they let this happen to begin with?
No.
That's on them. All this stuff, so the whole thing was a humongous humiliation to the Pharisees. So what ended up happening is the guards helped clean up the area. They helped Jesus clean up, and they got rid of that. But the Pharisees, it's just one of many incidents where they were absolutely humiliated. So this is an example of where you get the full picture and everything. It's like, we get it now. It makes sense. It's a full-blooded story now. So that's just one incident. There are so many other incidents, like the wedding at Cana, all these other things. It's really wonderful, this book. And to just give you some background of Anne Catherine Emmerich, this was a woman. She's venerable, or she's blessed now, I think.
She's blessed, and she was beatified. I was there. She was beatified at the same time that Blessed Emperor Karl was beatified.
Oh, there you go. Good company.
Same occasion.
So this was a woman who was bedridden, very simple woman, bedridden practically most or all of her life.
Which wasn't very long.
I think she lived till 40 or 50, but yeah, not long. I think she survived mostly on the Eucharist most of the time. I think she couldn't keep down food.
No,
she kept throwing up. And if you see her picture, her drawing, she's always got bandages on her head. And I asked my mom, I was like, why does she have a bandage on her head? And she said, oh, well, because she had the stigmata. But not only the stigmata, a fuller
crown
stigmata.
Of thorns.
Those are the wounds of the crown of thorns.
Yeah.
That she suffered. So this was a very holy person. And again, no one really disputes this. I mean, there's so much in this that it's actually dry and boring because it's in so detail in some areas. I skip around to some of the more interesting and famous areas. But it's really such a treasure that you lasts for years. So I highly recommend it. It's pricey, but it's worth it.
And she had visions. It's interesting. One of her visions that always stuck in my mind was that she saw in the far future families watching black boxes out of which the devil spoke.
Yeah.
And that always struck me as what a 19th century little nun would have made out of watching today's television.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
Imagine her tuning into a family watching Game of Thrones.
I know. One other caveat, it's a culture shock reading all of this because it truly details comprehensively Jesus' missionary work. And there's so much walking everywhere.
Which they did a lot of.
There's so much preaching everywhere. I mean, everybody in the entire... I'm told, even Rome heard of Jesus at the time because he's curing so many people. There's so many miracles in these volumes which aren't listed in the Bible. There's so many. And what else was I going to say? Oh, it's interesting because there's kind of a divergent language in the missionary work. I think you'll be pleased to hear this, Charles. Jesus so much is speaking of you need to get baptized. You need to get baptized. You need to get the baptism of John. You need to get it. And that's what he's saying all the time. You need to get baptized. We don't really say that anymore, do we?
No, even though he said in the Great Commission, go ye and make disciples out of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost.
But in the Bible, that's just one line, as if, you can dismiss that one line, right?
Well, they do.
And they can and do. In the duration of this 2000 set, it's a constant. Everywhere. He's saying this. Everywhere.
Now, let me ask a question. How much do the 4 books together cost?
It costs $100. $100. But it's... Let's see.
But if you order a single set, it's free postage and handling.
Oh, that's right. Single set. Free shipping on these giant books. So, highly recommend it. Anyhow. So, that's my plug for this book. It's one of my favorites. Really a good supplementary resource.
Excellent.
All right. Let us continue on with the questions. Next question is from William.
Okay.
I have read several books by Robert Hugh Benson. Lord of the World, Dawn of All, History of Richard Raynolds Solitary, Mirror of Shalott, to name a few. The way he describes mental prayer in these books, though, is unfamiliar to me, with a renunciation of the senses and a stripping away of consciousness of the world around whichever character. Do you know if this method is a holdover from the Quietism movement, a purely literary affectation, or a little of both?
It's actually neither one. It's very typical of the medieval English mystics, the Cloud of Unknowing, Julian of Norwich, Richard Rolle, Walter Hilton. It's exactly the kind of stuff they did. And actually you see the same thing with, to a degree, with people like Suso and Tauler and Meister Eckhart. Quietism is rather different. It's preached by Fenelon and Madame Guyon. Fenelon is the Bishop of Cambrai in the late 17th century. Basically, that's sort of stilling yourself completely, trying to remove any and all what's the word? Almost removing your personality from things, just becoming, immobile, hence the word quietism. Some versions of it said that if you did this properly, you'd be incapable of sin. And that was the quietist heresy. But,
yeah,
it's not the same thing at all.
He has a supplementary question. What is quietism and what does one have to do to avoid that pitfall?
Well, quietism, as I say, is the elevation of one's own inactivity to the end-all and be-all. To avoid quietism, it's simply not focusing on yourself to the exclusion of everything else.
Yeah.
And it's remembering that you're bound by the moral law. It's also not. It's also on the understanding that your interior life is not the end-all and be-all. Sticking close to the sacraments and exterior devotions and things like that.
Let's see here. What is your favorite method of mental prayer, both Finney and Charles?
Well, for myself, frankly, it's simply the conversation with God. It's talking to Him. I mean, most of our lives are spent thinking. That is to say, a dialogue with ourselves. So the trick is to aim that dialogue at Him who can read your thoughts anyway. He knows what you're thinking, so why not talk to Him? And, then it turns into a running dialogue. Not that He's ever answered me explicitly. I don't get interlocutions or anything like that. But a great deal of one's thinking, when you're not saying prayers and things like that, really should be addressed to Him, as though you were speaking to Him directly.
Yeah. I like adoration is a great opportunity for mental prayer and walks. On my walks too, I love mental prayer, I think mental prayer is a very important component to have a balanced prayer life, because if you think about, to create a personal relationship with God. Well, imagine you're trying to create a personal relationship with a person, and all you say to this person are good and holy words, but from other people, or you're always asking them for things, right? And I'm referring to prayers.
That's the way I am with my employer.
Yeah, and so structured prayer obviously is great. It's important. A rosary, all these things are hugely important, but I think it's only a piece of the puzzle, because you want to have a personal relationship with God. I think God loves when, in your own words, you have an outpouring. Like, thank you for blessing me with good health today, or helping me enjoy the birds, or these things. Because that comes from the heart in a way, where another person's words might not so much.
And chatting with Him familiarly over the things that are concerning you. Praising Him for the good He does for you and the world, thanking Him, but also sharing your thoughts and concerns and worries. And there again, adoration is a very good place for doing that. Are you worried? Are you worried about how your kid's doing in school? Just voice your worries to Him the way you would to somebody else.
There is a 4-part. There's 4 methods of. I don't know if you'd say mental prayer or communication with God, or I don't know. But from my adoration booklets, I picked it up from my adoration booklets on how to do adoration well. And so what the 4 parts are, so it's just adoring God, like, recognizing how great He is.
Yeah.
Saying sorry, of course, apologizing for being such a poor sinner. Thanking Him, thanking for everything. And lastly, what we do most and all the time is asking for things, because we're dependent on Him for all things. And so those are really the 4 components that I try to incorporate every time I go to adoration. There's nothing left if you handle those 4 areas. It's pretty comprehensive. Lastly, he asks, what resources outside of the usual Carmelite and Jesuit sources would you recommend for someone who's trying to take it more seriously?
Well, I would recommend a website in French. So if you don't read French, you need to use good old Google Translate. But it is called Spiritualité Chrétienne. and it has huge sections on the Sacred Heart, devotion to Our Lady, devotion to the Blessed Sacrament, devotion to the angels. I mean, it's an incredible site, and I recommend it very, very highly. I'd also recommend both Dom Guéranger and Dom Columba Marmion, who wrote books like Christ and His Mysteries. And one of the things I like about both Dom Marmion and that specific book, he has other books, Christ, the Life of the Soul, and so on. But Christ and His Mysteries, like Dom Guéranger's Liturgical Year, are all oriented toward the liturgical year. And this is very, very important, I think, partly because the year keeps on turning, and it would be wonderful if you could maintain the totality of the faith in your head all the time.
Yeah.
But you can't really. So in the course of the liturgical year, you commemorate and recall to yourself every one of the different mysteries of Christ's being, as well as the great saints and so forth. An interesting thing the priest here said in his sermon on Corpus Christi Day and he was quoting some other priest, but he said that Corpus Christi incorporates all the joys of Christmas, Easter, and Pentecost. Now, that's an interesting thought, that the Feast of the Eucharist encompasses the joys of Christmas, and incidentally, in the traditional Mass, the preface for Corpus Christi is the preface for Christmas. And then Easter with its resurrection, and Pentecost with the descent of the Holy Ghost, all these come together at Corpus Christi. Well, in the same way, it would be great if we could bring all those things, and the Ascension, and His final coming, and His kingship, and His Sacred Heart, and His precious blood, if they could all be equally present in our minds at once, together with the Virgin and all of her various mysteries, and all of the saints, and everything. It would be all there at the same time. But we can't. So, the liturgical year, well lived, prayerfully and thoughtfully lived, is a great way of doing that.
But it's okay that it's not all present at the same time, because the way us humans are, one aspect of a certain mystery will hit you hard. Like, wow, the Annunciation, can you believe that? That's all you need. That's all you need in life, is a continual resignation to God's will. Let it be done to me to His holy will. It's like, that was like one kick that I had. Like, that's all, abandonment to divine providence.
Which is what that is.
And another thing, the visitation, the charity, it's so, it's okay. And St. Francis de Sales says this: do what really gets to you, what speaks to you, and variety is the spice of life. There's so much to dwell on.
Well, definitely, and the thing, as I say with liturgical year, is that it does bring all this stuff to us every year the same way, and they become, over time, these mysteries become more and more a part of you.
Yeah. One book recommendation for me, I read a book called How to Converse Continually and Familiarly with God by St. Alphonsus Liguori. I see in the Tumbler House bookstore for $5, we're selling a book by Liguori called How to Converse with God. I think what happens with Liguori is he wrote so much that publishers chop up different sections of his writings. So I think that's what happened. But Liguori's content on prayer, I felt, was very practical, very straightforward, and I enjoyed it a lot. So I do recommend St. Alphonsus. Okay. Next question is from Jonathan. How were the laws of kings enforced in medieval Europe? Was it the responsibility of the nobles to keep the peasants in check?
Well, to a degree. I mean, depending on where you were and so forth. Obviously, in the king's own capital, he ran the show. And very often there would be what we would call justices of the peace and so forth in various places. But these were very often, this job was very often given local lords and so on. But contrary-wise, there were appeals from these people. At the end of the day, the local lord was not the court of final instance, although, by and large, they did maintain order. It was the same in the cities. There, the guilds had a much bigger role, and also the church, because there were cities that were actually ruled by their bishops or by a chapter of canons or by a monastery.
Okay. We have 5 questions from Marlon, who prefaced it saying, "Hello, Charles and Vincent. I have been sort of involved in my Novus Ordo Parish's youth group. The closest Latin Mass is a 2-hour drive. As a traditionalist, I sometimes feel as if I'm reinventing the wheel when trying to replace charismatic practices with more traditional ones. I have 5 questions pertaining to youth groups. First, I was wondering what you think about Catholic youth groups. What should lead them, and should they even exist? Or, excuse me, I'm sorry. Who should lead them? And should they even exist?"
Well, ideally, yes, they should exist. I mean, obviously, you've got to have something for young people to do. Who should lead them? Well, ideally, it would be a parish priest who would know what he was doing. However, in real life, there are a lot of those guys aren't around. So then you have to fall back on laymen. Well, what do you want? You want someone who is not that much older than his charges, so that he can understand them and so on, but old enough to where he'll have some authority over them, and they'll have confidence in his leadership. Obviously, as with any youth group, be it the Boy Scouts or anything else you like, this is a very solemn undertaking. When you take in hand the leadership of youth, it shouldn't be just a casual thing. It's got to be a real commitment, and you've got to be very careful who you have in that position, just as you have to be with teachers, because such a person has a great deal of can have a great deal of effect, a great deal of influence over the future course of those kids' lives, and especially over their faith lives.
Yeah. Okay. What is the best way to bring young people in the church, in your opinion?
Well, several things at once. The best liturgy possible is always nice, of course. Eucharistic adoration, outings of various kinds, education, but also the feeling of a challenge, the feeling of building a group, a core. Remember that young people, especially young men, want to feel like part of something. That's why gangs are big.
Yeah.
So your group needs to have a strong sense of identity. You might do this through uniforms. You might do it through various traditions that develop or that you borrow from different sources. So, for instance, if your youth group always has a part in parish processions, for instance, and maybe always does a bonfire on St. John's Eve, or always turns out in force for Candlemas, candles in hand, or whatever it is. There needs to be a great sense of identity and of doing things together, and a feeling that you're pulling together for a common purpose. It can't seem, on the one hand, it can't be stifling, and on the other hand, it can't be too casual.
Yeah, the way I say it, because I've been thinking a lot about this with the Knights of Columbus, but it's actually more relevant with just youth groups. I think you have to have something substantial, that whether it's a rosary or, the good that's going to develop everyone spiritually. And then you have to have the fun part.
Yeah.
You can't have your dessert until you finish what's on your plate, right?
No, but there has to be a dessert after the plate.
There has to be a dessert. And Vox Vitae, who is they're radicalizing pro-life teenagers, they have a wonderful thing. It's what they do, for example, is they go out and they say rosary in front of Planned Parenthood, and then they go out and just hang out afterwards socially and have In-N-Out Burger. And it works beautifully. It's really great. You got to have both. If it was one or the other, if it was just the rosary, I don't think you'd get anybody. And if it was just the other, well, then there's not that much purpose to it.
No.
You see?
And of course, too, it's interesting. The Knights of Columbus had a youth program that was gotten rid of. That was one of my first worries about the order, was when they got rid of the Squires of Columbus.
Isn't that ironic that we're scrambling so badly for the youth? And yeah.
Well, I didn't say, have you ever heard me express a great deal of confidence in the leadership? Have you ever heard me do this?
I know what we'll do. Because we have such a problem attracting youth, we're going to...
We'll stop getting them. Because we have troubles attracting the youth, so we'll stop bringing them in. We have trouble raising money, so we'll stop asking for funds. Don't get me started. And you know what the next one's going to be. I've told you, Knights of Unity. It's coming. They're going to drop Columbus like a hot potato.
Why don't you just go all the way? Why don't you, not even just the Knights, because that's sort of, the patrimony, etc. The Friends of Unity.
Yeah, that was fou. F-O-U. You know what fou means in French?
What?
Crazy.
There you go.
I think, yeah, Friends of Unity. We're fou. Yes, indeed you are. And of course, there are a lot of French-Canadian Knights of Columbus, in Quebec.
Yeah.
So I think they would get there would be Amis de l'Unité. But I think they would appreciate the acronym FOO very much.
Yeah. What is your opinion on youth conferences? What should be done, and is there a traditionalist alternative to them? Are there any modern examples today?
Well, there's a trad youth group called Juventutum who you probably should get in touch with, maybe get some points from.
They're kind of not active, though. I've tried them. I've tried them once upon a time, and it's because it's local too. It also depends on where you live.
Yeah, like Juventutum Boston is very active. It, as you say, it depends on where you are, but I would say that youth conferences can be useful, but again, you've got to have that combination of things. There should be adequate worship, good liturgy, adoration, rosary. There should be fun stuff, both in terms of just hanging out and perhaps going to local sites that are worth seeing, and educational. So, you should have some decent lectures and so forth, and with inspiring speakers and all that kind of thing. So those things can be very useful.
A tangential question. I've always wondered about World Youth Day, which is the Catholic thing, and I kind of am scared. It's kind of like I'd like to know if it's not liberal, because some of the things I see superficially seem cringe. It's kind of like, I'm like this. It's like, is it okay to look? Because I don't want to look too much and scar myself. But
so some of them are cringe, but under Benedict, I don't know how it is now, but under Benedict, there was a lot of trad-esque participation in these things.
Cool.
So.
Okay.
I mean, that's what Juventutum came from,
Oh.
It was founded for a trad presence at one of the World Youth Days under Pope Benedict.
Okay. How should a controversial topic, gay marriage, modesty, etc., be mentioned to teenage Novus Ordo Catholics? should they be said clearly or bluntly or in a different manner?
As offensively as possible. No. What I would say is that you have to zero in. See, remember that kids today, like everybody else today, are wildly subjective. So before you go after the abstract reason, i.e., the moral reason why these things are wrong, you have to lead with their terrible results and how they damage people. You know, what's wrong with gay marriage? Well, number one, they can't repent. Imagine putting yourself in a position where you were constantly repeating a sin and were unable to repent of it. Secondly, imagine being raised with two fathers and two daughters, or two mothers. What would that do to you? It would mess you up pretty badly, is what it would do to you. So, you're basically starting with the effect rather than the cause. But you have to do that, I think, in a lot of areas, not just teaching morals, but teaching philosophy and teaching anything else. Because, as I say, kids today, they don't know a lot, and they're very subjective. So you have to begin from what little they do know, and that's things that affect them directly.
I think you have to have, I mean, ideally, a really holy soul to
Wow,
handle
yeah.
that. No, I mean, but like there's a certain, because to combat the certain lie in American society, I'm personally thinking of Father Justin, who's local. He's a Norbertine. He always had the most fiery sermons about, what if they're, don't count on second chances, stop procrastinating, really just straight, hammer it in. And I always had hyperimposed onto his personality that he was a severe and stoic character, matching his sermons. And then I was absolutely shocked and taken aback when I was seeing video of him, and he's like the most fun-loving, warm guy in the world. And what I'm, because I'm a victim to American programming, which says that you're a stick in the mud if you're a prude. That you have no fun, that you're just nasty, you're severe, you're stoic, you're Debbie Downer. But there are examples, very holy examples, where no, that's not true. You can be strict, you can have a good holy life and have fun. More fun, actually more fun than other people, really.
St. Philip Neri comes to mind.
Yeah. So, yeah. Right? Should contemporary music be used at all, or should it be looked down on?
Well, I wouldn't look down on anything because I'm so nice and open, but I certainly wouldn't use it. You want music that elevates, you want music that focuses on worship. And and this is one of the things your brother used to go on about. The motu proprio, said Pius X, has never been abrogated. And one of the things it didn't like was music that was theatrical or entertainment-based in nature. Well, what is this contemporary praise music, this Christian rock, except precisely that?
Yeah.
And mind you, the kinds of entertainment-based music he had in mind was stuff from opera, from classical music. So I think, emphasis on chant and some of the traditional hymns is a good idea.
Yeah, I have a go-to line on this matter to try to be gentle in a sense, and use kind of, I don't know, be subjective in a sense, where I say with Gregorian chant, I like to think that my singing, my prayers are united with the choirs of angels in heaven, that we're all praying as one, glorifying God. The way the music is lends itself to that. But with contemporary music, I have a harder time picturing angels singing that, just for me personally. And so I think that's kind of I think people see the truth in that perspective. That angels, you can't. It's kind of difficult picturing them glorifying God with contemporary music. So,
Yeah, seems about right.
okay. Okay, a question from Theo.
All right.
Dear Mr. Coulombe, Dr. Alan Phimister speculated that we modern Catholics are likely going to spend many hundreds of years in purgatory because of the incredibly light penances that are given in confession today, especially compared to ancient and medieval penances. For example, fasting for 3 years on bread and water as penance for an act of fornication. Can you expound on the Church's teaching on the temporal and eternal orders of justice, indulgences, and the economy of penance, which is so little known today?
Well, I don't know Dr. Finister at all, and I really would hesitate to judge on who's going to go longer or not. If there's any defect in the assignment of a penance, it goes to the problem of the priest,
Yeah.
not the individual.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, basically, the merits of our Lord on the cross and all the good deeds that he did, and all the good deeds done by Our Lady and all the saints, are considered to fill up what's called the treasury of merits. Now, that treasury is in the keeping of the Church, the binding power, whatsoever thou bound on earth shall be bound in heaven, and so forth. So, you and I, when we sin, there's the sin itself, and then there's what is called the temporal punishment to the sin. Now, the best way I can put it to you is, let's say you steal my wallet, and you spend all the money in it. Well, then you feel bad. You give me my wallet back. I forgive you, but you still owe me the money. Now imagine, if you will, that every sin comes with what's the word I want? It comes with a fine, so to speak.
Yeah.
All right. Now that temporal punishment that adds up from every sin that we have can be worked out in one of two ways. We can do it on this side of the grave or on the other side. If we do it on this side of the grave, well, we can do it if we do it on the other side, it'll be in purgatory. Because no one can go to heaven unless they're perfect. If we do it on this side of the grave, it can be done through offering up our sins. It can be done through all sorts of penances. And it can be done through acquiring indulgences. Now, indulgences are not get out of jail free cards. Sorry, well, not usually. What it is that the Church applies the merits from the treasury of grace to your particular case, and does so one of two ways: either partially, which some of the sin of the temporal punishment you've got on here is removed, and plenary indulgences, whereby you lose everything you've got up to that point. Now, interesting enough, when you were baptized, not only was the original sin taken away from you, but any actual sins you committed, would have been taken with you as well as the temporal punishment. So when you get baptized, you start anew with a new slate.
Yeah.
Now, the Church assigns indulgences to certain prayers and certain actions.
The Recolta, which is a specific prayer book, enumerates these for each prayer. It's pretty cool.
Precisely. But one of the things you got to bear in mind about the older books is that when they say days, it doesn't mean what people think. Right? Yeah. It says 248 days. It means you get 248 days off purgatory. That's not what it means. What it means is that you get the equivalent merits of doing 248 days of bread and water type penance.
Yeah.
So that's kind of important to bear in mind. And it also, I suppose, speaks to Theo's concern about medieval penances versus modern ones. Indulgences, shall we say, cover a lot of sins, or at least a lot of temporal punishment. So that's basically how it works.
There's so many different ways to get a plenary indulgence nowadays. It's kind of shocking. Reading St. Francis, one of several St. Francis biographies, you know what the only way to get a plenary indulgence was back in the day?
Tell me.
Oh, you don't want to guess?
No.
Let's join the Crusades.
Ah, yeah. Take the cross. And that, the other thing, too, to bear in mind about a plenary indulgence, or any indulgence, actually, is that they're not just automatic, because you don't just do, and that's it. You have to intend to get the indulgence and be in a state of grace when you're doing it. You do the action. You've got to go to confession, go to communion, again with the intention of getting the indulgence, and you've got to pray for the intentions of the Holy Father.
Yeah, I have to admit, this Dr. Phimister's speculation is a little bit unusual to me, because it almost seems to assume that there are no prayers, penances, mortifications, acts of reparation outside of what is assigned, the priest assigns to the penitent.
Which, of course, is not true.
Which is not true. Maybe the doctor is assuming that the penitent simply does none of these things unless the priest asks of it, but I feel that's not the reality.
Well, it does seem to be leaving indulgences out of the picture.
And indulgences, yeah, because you get even an indulgence for making the sign of the cross.
That's true. And also remember that it is the church, specifically the Pope, that assigns indulgences.
Yeah.
And this goes back, as I say, to this power of loosening and binding.
Yeah.
That comes with the papal office.
Yeah. Okay, so looks like we've got about a little over an hour and 20-minute episode. I think that's good enough. It's super late where Charles is, so I can see he's struggling. So we're gonna call it for tonight. But I feel like this has been a really good episode. I hope you all have enjoyed it and enjoyed some things that we've said. Would you like anything you want to close on, Charles?
Yeah, we're leaving the month of the Sacred Heart, and we'll be going into the month of the Precious Blood. July the 1st is, in the traditional calendar, the Feast of the Precious Blood. So it's something to keep. It's also the Feast of St. Junipero Serra, who you should particularly pray to right now because he's being attacked by all sorts of stupid people. It is Dominion Day, the National Day of Canada. And it will be the 44th anniversary of the death of my father. 34th anniversary. 1996. July the 1st.
That's 24.
Oh, all right, 24. Yeah, you're right. 24 years.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind, if you would, and of your charity, please pray for the repose of the soul of Guy Coulombe, without whom not only would I not be here, but 3/4 of my stories wouldn't ever have been told.
Okay, I'm going to actually impromptu publicly ask for prayer intentions for a Knight of Columbus who I'm very fond of. He's also a patron of the show. You know him personally, Charles. Alan Barasorda.
Yeah.
He's having a huge operation removing a tumor on June 23rd. Yeah, I saw last Sunday he told me. So keep him in your prayers if you would, ladies and gentlemen. He's a really good man.
Yeah, he is.
So,
he is.
Okay.
Well,
okay.
It's a rainy night in the old empire.
Yeah, I'm glad we didn't have too many connection problems. It was pretty
No,
sketch in the beginning.
yeah.
Okay, that'll do it for this episode. Remember, if it's Monday
It's off the menu.
and the soul you've saved,
Maybe your own, but no COD is accepted.
we'll see you next time.
Good night.